let me just set the context. So this is the 14th session of SaaS Talks. And as I repeat every time, this is not meant to be a panel. This is not meant to be a rags to riches story. This is actually almost meant to be a discussion around a very specific working topic. As you are building a SaaS company, there are lots of different things you need to learn as you are sort of building it. And we pick these micro topics. Today's micro topic is outbound demand gen. Why did we pick this? We picked this because at least now I've been investing for 8 years in SaaS. And I find that when I started, there was a particular recipe to building an Indian SaaS company, which was plain existing categories, target SMBs, leverage the cost arbitrage in sales and development and customer support, right? You will be able to make the unit economics work, which actually players in the US cannot. And that's your sort of ticket to existence, if you will, right? And the sales motion or the demand gen motion was all inbound, right? It was either led through content marketing or led through SEO, SEM. That has been the recipe that we have followed. But over the last 5 years, things have actually changed quite dramatically because everybody has gone upscale in the ACVs. Even 5K ACV used to look very good. Today, even 50K doesn't look that good to most people. People are building new categories, not just existing categories. People are going into categories which are a lot more educational. So outbound demand gen has become a lot more important. And to be fair, I think it's okay to say that at an aggregate level, we don't get outbound demand gen as well as we get the inbound motion, right? So that's going to be the topic. Two people who we have as our anchor guest today. So let me begin with Ankur. Ankur and I have known each other now since 2007. I think it goes back to June 2007. Ankur, I think I met you the first time.
Yes. We were working on Future Group.
We were both at SAP during those days. Ankur has played a variety of different leadership roles, and his, I guess, his forte was that he always liked to build new things and not what existed. And therefore, no surprise that he moved over to the startup world, been at a couple of startups, most recently being at Capillary, where he led the entire go-to-market for Capillary, including the entire demand gen motion, and now has become an entrepreneur and building BambooBox.ai. Deepak, very similar background. I think I've known Deepak since early 2017, and there is a common thread here, which is that which is Capillary. Ankur worked at Capillary, and Capillary founder Anish introduced me to Deepak in early 2017. And Deepak also has a very special background. He built US for traction at one point, and now is the founder and CEO of Slintel. And when we invested, I remember that Deepak was following an outbound demand gen motion. And since then, at least we have learned a lot from Deepak in terms of how outbound demand gen is done. So couldn't have expected better anchor guests for today's session. Just a quick note to all the listeners. You will have to tolerate me for the first 10, 11 minutes only. Thereafter, it's going to be an open house. Anybody can ask questions. Anybody can answer questions. Those of you who have experience in this topic, please don't be shy. Raise your hands. We'll actually bring you on screen here so that you can be sort of more live participant. If you are shy, just want to ask questions, use the Q&A panel to ask questions. And lastly, please keep your questions only to the outbound demand gen topic and not to any other topic. So with that, Deepak and Ankur, welcome. Thank you for taking our time. And thank you everyone as well for joining. So Deepak, I'm going to begin with you.
Sure.
I remember that when we had just invested in you, and I think this goes back just over 2 years now, your entire motion was outbound demand gen, right? And clearly you did it very well. Two questions that come to my mind. One is, as an early stage startup, why did you start with the outbound motion? And number two, since then, I know that you have ramped up your inbound so successfully as well. How do you sort of, if you have to educate new entrepreneurs, what are the basic differences between those two motions?
Sure. So yeah, I think a funny story, right? When we started Slintel, Alok, like you said, it was purely outbound. Actually, for the first 1 year, it was all outbound. And today, 80% of our closures and leads come from inbound. So there's been a big shift from outbound to inbound. So the reasons why I started outbound initially, one was, honestly, I didn't know how inbound worked, right? I scaled. I was part of the 0 to 1 journey at 2 prior startups. One was Traction, the other was Eightfold. And in both cases, I'd set up the outbound motion, right? So one was know-how of setting it up. 2 was not afraid of rejection, because I've been in sales before. Outbound requires you to go and, 99% of the cases you'll be rejected. So didn't have that fear, like some founders have that, right? And the third is, I always feel, when you approach the market in the initial days, you need to approach it before even the MVP is launched. And it's hard to build an inbound motion at that point, when even before an MVP is launched, even before your website is live, even before you have that content, right? So what will you show ads on, or how will you generate those inbound leads? The last reason, in retrospect, and this I did not know back then, was now I do know, now that we have an inbound motion. When you have inbound and outbound working, right? So inbound gives you a lot of noise. There's a lot of leads that you can get, and you really need to filter down, prioritize to find the right connects. Initially, at least in the beginning stages, you don't want a lot of noise when you're starting a company. You want to, because even when you talk to your friends and family about your idea, I would assure you like 70%, 75% plus would say that, hey, this won't work, right? Or most people would say that this won't work. But you need to be talking to not your friends or family, not to people but you need to be talking to those specific personas that are going to buy your product. And these guys are not going to come in inbound. I mean, at least I don't know a way where they will come in inbound even before an MVP is launched, right? So I think outbound works very well in those cases when you target those guys, get those meetings. The last thing I would like to add is, even when you're going, really, really targeted, right? In the beginning stages of a product, you may not have a Fortune 1000 company. For example, you may not be able to get a meeting with a Fortune 1000 company, right? You might, in all probability, you might start out small. So with outbound, you can even focus on that, right? You can say, hey, let me target companies less than 50 employees, VPs of sales in US, in California, in the SaaS industry. You can go really targeted, you can talk to them, and you can see what's working, what is not working, and therefore you build your product accordingly. So for all these reasons, outbound was the motion. And Alok, very quickly, I'll answer your second question. How have things changed, right? So at least with Slintel, what we realized over time was we're building a product in a very well-defined category. And you were always right. I know initially you used to tell us that, hey, you should build an inbound motion. And that's something we realized later on, that ours is a very well-searched category, thousands of searches happening every day, and we just need to get in front of them and sell, right? Having said that, we haven't stopped our outbound motion. I can talk about that later, but I always feel that you need to have multiple motions running to get the best bang for the buck.
Fantastic. Ankur, over to you. I think it is fair to say that there is not a demand gen motion in any book that you have not seen, I think, through sort of the different companies that you have been in, and now you're an entrepreneur yourself, as an early stage entrepreneur. What would be your algorithm for telling other entrepreneurs that, look, should you start out with outbound? I know Deepak gave his view on this thing. Should you start with an outbound? Should you start with an inbound? What would you do?
I think I largely agree with the points which Deepak mentioned, Alok. But there is never a one size fits answer here. If you are in a category, as Deepak said, that his category is very well researched, it's a defined category. In that case, as in beginning with an inbound is not that bad an option. You have a product which is like Slintel, very quick to value. It's a defined category. There are a lot of searches which are happening. So in that sort of, if you're in that space, it makes a lot of sense to start with inbound. Personally speaking, I'm a big outbound fan. So, but for categories which are yet getting defined, for example, if you look at something like a WhatFix, right? So when WhatFix was launched, there was no category in which they were operating. So for them to build an inbound motion would have been very, very difficult, right? But at the same time, both of these motions have their own preparations to be done. Inbound is very heavy on content. You got to have a website, you got to have your content in place, you got to have an engine to handle the noise. As Deepak also said, there's so much of noise which comes into inbound.
Right.
While on the outbound side, you don't need to worry about some of these, but you need to worry whether you exactly know your ICP or not. Because if you don't know your ICP, and if you want to run after 10,000 companies in an outbound motion, then that's never going to work. So when you are starting up, if you are very clear that this is my ICP, and if you are a company which is trying to define a category, then an outbound is a good place to start. But if you are in a category which is well defined and you are still discovering your ICP, then I think inbound is a better motion to start with.
Got it. I will ask my last question because I know I'm cutting into the questions that are going to come from everybody else. Is that, and either of you, please feel free to, any of you should feel free to take it, that if you look at the conversion rates from these two different motions, do you find that there is a significant difference between the two? And I have the same question on the unit economics eventually. So if you look at ACV or CAC over ACV as a metric, right? Do you find there to be significant difference between the two?
Yeah, sorry, I can go first.
Go ahead.
At least in our case, I think when you look at the conversion rate, Alok, if you look at the leads to SQL conversion, SQL being sales qualified lead, so inbound will have a very low lead to SQL conversion rate. Many leads will not qualify into marketing qualified or sales qualified. But the ones that are SQLs in inbound, the conversion rate from SQL to closure is very high, right? Because if they are sales qualified, there is an opportunity on the table. You just have to get in front of them and prove that you're better than competition and close the deal. For outbound, you don't have necessarily, you generally go and target companies that will be SQLs anyway, right? So you don't have the lead to SQL problem there. The SQL to closure conversion rate in inbound is definitely better than outbound, but the top of inbound has a top of the funnel problem where you get a lot more leads and you have to filter down that noise.
Yeah, so I think conversions, again, as Deepak is also saying, is depending upon where you're looking at it. If you're looking at top of the funnel, in my view, top of the funnel conversions, if you're reaching out to 500 people versus if you're getting 500 leads, right, through your inbound channels, you might see that the top of the funnel conversions are slightly better for inbound. But once something is qualified and handed over to sales or has become an opportunity, then on there is little reason why the conversion should differ, whether it is an inbound or an outbound channel. So that's pretty much pretty much what we have seen. At least I have seen in all last 7-8 years I've been running demand generation motions. So once it is, if your qualifying machinery is working properly, then there is very little reason after being qualified the conversions would matter. But on top of the funnel, of course, outbound will have a significantly lower output if you're reaching to 500 companies there, because you got to get your timing right in case of outbound, right?
Got it. Sorry, can either of you comment also, is there any difference in the CAC to ACV ratio between the two motions?
Yeah, so I think at least for inbound, ACVs are generally, at least what we have seen, ACVs are lower than outbound, because in outbound, you tend to target companies with larger ACVs. Like there's a selection bias there, right? You don't tend to go after companies with lower ACVs. Inbound, you can't really control. You get, unless you're doing ABM campaigns, right? You get ACVs of all sizes. So the average ACV of inbound tends to be lower than outbound, unless you're running a really bad outbound motion. The CAC for the cost of customer acquisition for inbound, I think, Alok, that varies company to company. For example, if there's a huge SEM spend on inbound, CACs can be pretty high, in some cases higher than outbound as well. But if most of the leads are coming organic through content and SEO, then the CACs definitely would, I think, be lower than outbound.
Understand. I know that there are tons of questions which are already there, and we have Subramaniam already here on the screen. So I actually don't know whether I should call you Kasibhat or Subramaniam, but would love for
Subbu.
you to yourself and your question.
Yeah, my name is Subbu. I run a company called Begum, which is into industrial IoT and 4.0 solutions for manufacturing plants. One question which I was trying to understand from both your inputs was, would the value of what you sell define whether inbound or outbound would prefer, right? If you're looking at a deal size of maybe a million and above, then probably you would tend more towards outbound, right?
Yeah. Ankur, do you want to take that question? I'm happy to answer as well, if you want to.
So can you, Subramaniam, can you repeat the question? You were saying if the deal values are higher, then outbound is a preferred channel. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand. Would you actually look at the deal sizes that you are dealing with to define your inbound or outbound strategies? If you are at a higher level of value, then you need a lot more interaction, a lot more perseverance to sell, which means more of an outbound would work, right?
See, in my view, outbound as a strategy helps you catch the customers young, right? So you catch them much before, and you have an opportunity to define that journey. And hence, if you are targeting larger deals, and if your average ACV which you are targeting is upwards of 150, 200, 250K, then you would want to drive the sales cycle rather than being very opportunistic to respond to someone who's already ready out there in the market to buy you, right? So definitely what you're saying is right. If the deal cycles are, if the deal values are higher, then at some point in time, one would realize that a very healthy outbound engine is much more important than trying to be an opportunistic and reach out to customers who are out there in the market to buy.
Yeah, I'd also add to that, if your ACVs are, say, for example, less than $1,000 per year, right? You actually don't even have a choice there. I mean, you have to go inbound. Outbound may not be cost efficient for you, right? When ACVs are higher, I think you do have choices. Inbound becomes difficult. Like if I've seen if ACVs are over, say, $50,000, you can close through inbound. You can, but you definitely need, like even an inbound lead needs, people to speak to them, right? You need salespeople to convince them why they have to pay $50,000 or $100,000 before they purchase a product. Very few products have been able to crack a complete inbound motion at that scale, at that scale of ACVs. So I think on the lower end, you don't have an option. On the higher end, you can have a dual strategy. But I've seen outbound tends to work better when ACVs are over $50,000.
Got it.
Go ahead, Arpit.
No, I actually was looking at the Q&A panel and I thought there were two questions which maybe could be combined, and Ankur and Deepak, either one of you guys, please feel free to take it. Which is basically around, best practices and the technology stack of the tools. So any recommendations around that? And I think Shobhit has asked specifically for account-based marketing. I think Ishwar has had a more broader question on what are the favorite tools to automate outbound reach outs.
Yeah. So at least from an outbound standpoint, you definitely need a sales engagement platform. So you need either an outreach, sales slot. So there are multiple tools. I can talk about my favorite tools later, but you need the stack. You need a sales engagement platform, because outbound is as much as a science as it's an art, right? You need persistence. You need a minimum set number of reach outs every day, and you need sequencing. So you need to buy a sequencing tool for that. You need to have a sales intelligence tool, either a ZoomInfo or a Slintel, or there are other players as well. And you need to obviously have a CRM where you store all of this.
But I like how you inserted Slintel into the conversation there. I think that was very nicely done.
You can forgot the first thing that I said, so it was intentional.
And by the way, these will be classified as inbound leads when they come after the session. So
yeah.
And Alok and I will take a commission.
Yeah, I read about your channel strategy sometime before, so maybe this counts as a channel partner. But yeah, initially you need these three, right? I don't think you need a lot of tools initially, but as you scale your outbound, you definitely need to analyze conversations. You need tools like a Gong or a Wingman. You need different tools. Then you probably need a CSMIC or a GTM buddy right? You need different tools as you scale your outbound, but initially as you start, you definitely need at least a sales intelligence tool, sales enablement, and a CRM software.
Yeah, so I think there are tons of tools on the outbound side. It's a crowded space. So there is an ABM, there is sales engagement platforms, there are content syndication platforms, there are of course marketing automation platforms, there are CRM systems. So depends upon what stage of evolution you are. So you can start with a very thin landscape where you just have a marketing automation tool or an account-based engagement tool. So you can start thin. So depends upon which stage of evolution you are as a company to decide how to run this.
And at least maybe in your book, Ankur, what do you think would be the bare minimum to start with?
Bare minimum to start would be that you can reach out to BambooBox. We are trying to build something. So sorry, but on a serious note, I think a bare minimum to start with is a marketing automation platform. You got to have an automation platform at least to start your email automation journeys, to start your social ads and so on and so forth. So a marketing automation system is a bare minimum to start with.
Got it.
And prior to that, on an hygiene front, you got to have the data for the accounts which you want to go after. So whether you have your own data team or you partner with one of the data providers like a Slintel or a ZoomInfo or wherever. So that gives you a platform, and then on top of that, a marketing automation platform on a tech stack front. Right? So that's a bare minimum which you want.
Ritesh, welcome to the screen.
Thank you, Alok. Thanks, everyone.
Please go ahead. Ask. I know you have put it on the panel also, on the Q&A panel also, but please go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. So I run a startup called Azluri, right? So we are in a category which is just evolving. So we are into SaaS management. So we help companies manage SaaS applications. So if you look at the search volume in the category that we operate in, it's pretty low. And there are tons of players with $100, $200 million funding who are bidding for the PPC words and stuff. So for us, outbound becomes very important. But the challenge that we see is, given that it's a new category, there is a lot of education that needs to be done. And the conversion rates, even from an outbound perspective, are pretty low compared to what it would have been for a mainstream company. So when we, as an early stage company trying to do this, so there are limitations in terms of number of emails that you can send. You can't really increase the top of the funnel. So from that perspective, so what is your advice on how do we scale this outbound motion so that we are able to reach it at scale? And then even if the conversion rates are smaller, we know there is a tangible amount of leads that are coming in. So just wanted to hear your thoughts, given that early stage company, the domain ratings, all of that are pretty low compared to what it would have been for an established company. How do you scale this outbound process without getting impacted and landing in the spam folders of the companies? So a little tactical, but just wanted to understand how do you guys address it?
Deepak, you want to take it? Then I'll
Sure. So Ritesh, I think, by the way, I love that space you're in. I know there's a few companies in that space. I think it's an increasingly big problem, and it's a painkiller than a vitamin, right? Like people need to manage SaaS software. But I do agree that search volumes are not very high in that category. But I don't necessarily agree with the outbound motion piece. I'll tell you why, right? I believe you're solving a real problem out there, right? There's a pain point of SaaS management software. When you reach out in your outbound pitches, it doesn't need to be a product or a category they're familiar with, right? You just need to focus on the pain point and the right persona. So say for example, persona is the CFO of a company, right? Who manages all this SaaS spend, and you tell him, hey, I can reduce your spend by 20% by just analyzing your software, and then help you. And by the way, many other sales finance leaders are already thinking about this. So as long as you can pivot towards a real pain point and show them ROI, I don't think the category matters so much from an outbound motion perspective, in my opinion. But maybe you have to just optimize on identifying the right persona, Ritesh, and the right pain point in messaging.
Sure.
I think Ritesh, the tactical or a technical question which you were asking, I think a lot of companies experiment with lot of domains when they're writing emails, right? So if you have 0.com, 0.net, 0.in, so you will sort of start warming those depending upon the number of people whom you want to reach out to, and hence you kind of save your core domain for landing up into the spam folder. But that's part of the game. You kind of start with that. You build the domain authority over a period of time, and that's how you do it. There is no other way to kind of sort that out. But to begin with, and someone also, I think Vinod is asking this question, so I'll respond to that as well. So I think when you start in the very early stages of the company, when you want to start an outbound motion, see, an outbound motion is not as simple as just writing emails, right? So you got to have content around that as well. And when you create content, you can't create content for everyone, right? So for example, if you're focusing on a geography or an industry or a problem statement, your content, right from your emails to blogging to your website, everything has to be aligned, right? So it is usually very difficult to have a very broad-based outbound motion right in the beginning. So you will still kind of focus and identify where is your winnability the more, where the pain point is the more. And hence you will come out with a list of 500,000, 2,000, whatever number of accounts or contacts you have. And you will kind of stitch together the entire end-to-end motion for that particular persona or that particular industry, right? For running an outbound motion. And that number is always finite unless you are in a extremely horizontal play where there are hundreds of thousands of companies. But you will always be able to, if you think deeply, you will always be able to come out with a finite number there to begin your motion.
Got it. So the key takeaway that I'm going away with, Ankur and Deepak, is that the ICP is critical, right? So we've been experimenting with multiple ICPs within the limited number of emails that we can send. I think if we get that right, we can double down on a specific ICP. Yeah. So
I would tend to believe that. Yeah.
Ritesh, I want to add to this. See, the thing is, first of all, the more the amount of education required in a category, remember that at least in the early stages, lower the conversion will be. That is just sort of part of the parcel, I guess, so to say. And not all categories are born equal. If I look at what Slintel does, there is no need to even think about this category. Everybody knows about this category for the last 2 decades, right? But if you are into a new category, there is going to be that early pain, but don't let that discourage you, first of all.
Sure.
And the second point that Ankur made is just very, very critical, which is that even if it's a horizontal product, actually, I would argue that you think about the journey that they take slightly differently. Again, I'll take a different example. Let's take WhatFix. It's a very horizontal product, right? You are building flows to help users understand how to do a particular task and so on. It is as horizontal as it gets. But you need to start building, let's say you're sending out these cold emails. When they click, where do they land? Is a Salesforce user going to see something completely different than a Workday user or something else? Even in the stuff that you're sending out, the customer examples that you're going to give out the reference, in many ways you want to lead with the references as well. Are they going to be different for those different? And like Ankur is saying, for every persona, the messaging, I think the iteration of messaging and the content behind it and the journey that you take, the more you can customize it to or segment it and then customize it, I think the better the outcome you will see. And that's why it's a continuous evolution. You can never say that, look, my recipe is done. Now I'm just going to put more fuel to the fire.
Sure. I agree with you, Alok. So one of the success that we have seen is what we have done is we have created a small tool called ROI calculator. So once people get this, they can personalize it and get what is the ROI that they get. So that has seen good results for us. I just thought of sharing in this forum. Thank you, Alok. Thanks, Ankur. Thanks.
Abhishek Kaushik was the first one to put the question. We have not taken his question so far. So I don't know if it's already answered or not, but his question is that, does the outbound motion always need to be a cold email or ABM? What are some of the best outbound practices? Is there any, and in fact, let me ask it differently. Is there anything outside cold email that you should be doing as part of outbound motion?
I think if you ask me, Alok, outbound, one of the things which have worked very well for a lot of companies in the last year and a half is the entire webinar motion. So there are people more than interested to come and listen to you, given that everyone is sitting at home and everyone has tons of time. So webinars, I think, is a very, very effective outbound tool if done very properly in a very structured fashion. Apart from, of course, mails and increasingly the telephonic conversations are reducing. But yes, after the cold emails, webinars is a very, very potent tool, I believe.
Yeah, I have a slightly different perspective, I feel Ankur, webinars are definitely one of the things that are working very well right now, and ABM, and there's so many different channels, events, etc. Depending on the stage of the company, right? Like if a company is a little more mature, then all of these work really, really well. Initially, people may not even sign up for the webinars, right? I mean, or events may not work really well. So I think in the initial days for founders, at least what I have seen is outbound, you have to use a combination. At least in our case, we used a combination of email, cold calling, and LinkedIn. We have tried one of the three or two of the three. You get the best results when you use all three combined. And when you use all three combined, you also get the best results, at least in our experience, when you run sequences. And just drop one email, one call, one LinkedIn, and say, hey, I tried this, and the prospect is not responding. When you do your research, you would see that typically it takes you have to have like an 8 or 9 touch point sequence spanned over 30 to 45 days, and it's a process, right? And every day you try out different templates for different personas. Alok, to your point, every persona resonates to a different kind of messaging, and therefore outbound, I feel, is as much as science as it's an art. You have to be persistent and spend 3 to 4 hours of your day just innovating on templates every single day and using tools to kind of automate all these sequences.
I want to add one more thing, which is, and again, this is not to give a plug into the data thing, which I know both Ankur and Deepak, your companies are deeply involved in. But I think where the art and science of outbound has changed quite dramatically is the amount of data that you have available today for the prospects that you're reaching out to. And I think in that sense, the practice of outbound today is very different. And I mean, I know that I belong to the dinosaur era in this space, but I remember that even in my days of selling at SAP, for the customers which were really large, we had a different kind of outbound. We actually had a team which will just research the hell out of these prospects, and we will literally build a customized. Ankur, you might remember we used to call these consultants at that point in time, and this was really a professional. It's like what a McKinsey and BCG will take to a prospect, but again, that's a very heavy motion, right? Maybe it's justified if you're approaching Chevron Texaco or a P&G as a prospect in an outbound style. It's not going to be relevant. But I think the amount of data that we have available today is changing that art and science to a more volume-led approach as well, which was just not possible earlier. And I think, I know, Ritesh, you have left the screen, but that changes. I mean, I think you talked about scaling. Scaling does not necessarily mean that if you're sending 1,000 emails a month, you have to send 10,000 tomorrow. It might be that you're sending better 1,000 emails a month as opposed to necessarily increasing the volume.
Just to add on to what Alok was saying, I also think this, and I think there has been a question on this in the Q&A panel also, but what's also changing this outbound motion a little bit, and Deepak, you'll understand it better, is the whole piece around intent. Because as more and more data is starting to get available, actually buyer intent is getting, at least signals of buyer intent are coming in a lot sooner than what one would expect in a more traditional sales process that maybe we used to run, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And that again becomes important because that helps filter out the outbound motion as well. Otherwise, again, you are doing like a very, very widespread, and that's not very efficient.
Guys, if I may change the topic a little bit, which is that, and several people have asked us on the Q&A panel also, which is to think about who does what for a minute, right? And let's take the perspective of an early stage company for a minute. Do you believe that it's the salespeople that should be doing their own outbound prospecting as well? Or do you think of this as a separate function? And even if it's a separate function, would you keep inbound and outbound with the same set of people in the early stages? Or do you believe that you need to separate the two right from the get-go because these are very different skills?
Yeah, I can take that question. So in the initial days, founders need to do the selling. If you hire a sales guy initially without a sales motion or without the first few clients, they will not know where to sell and they'll struggle quite a bit, right? So in the initial days, the founder is doing inbound, is doing outbound, as you're building a team up. But when you hire your first, say you've got like 5 to 10 closures and you feel a little more confident, and you have created, which personas work, messaging resonates, you go and hire your sales guy, right? So I've seen companies, some companies hire 2 folks, like one SDR and one AE to begin with, where SDR does only prospecting and AE does only closing. I've seen some companies hire just one person who prospects, spends half the day prospecting, half the day closing. Initially may not be a bad strategy, because initially you may not even have the resources to hire 2 people, to be honest, right? And it's okay, like, because initially you're not dealing with that kind of volume. But what you'll realize is once you have a few closures, the person who's doing both prospecting and closing becomes really good at either prospecting or either closing, right? Because it's difficult to manage volume on both sides. And that's the time you kind of bifurcate that role and you get one more person and say, hey, you're good at prospecting, I'm getting another person for closing, right? So you bifurcate that and create that motion. But for marketing, for inbound, I believe you need to have a separate team. I don't think an AE or SDR can do inbound properly. You need to at least have one person for marketing. And our experience with marketing has been that, content marketing takes time, SEO takes time. So if you're a very well searched category, you can have an SEM person to start out with SEM. But if it's not a very well searched category, then you want to, I would optimize on the SEO or content person on the marketing side.
So I think outbound and inbound clearly are very, very different motions. Inbound anyway requires a different skills when you look at the back end. Who's setting up your SEM, SEO strategy, who's setting up your ads, who's setting up your content, who's setting up your websites. All of that is part of the back end inbound motion. When it comes to the front end side, once the lead has come, on the inbound side, the most important thing is whether you're able to qualify it properly or not, whether you're able to remove the noise. If you're more programmatic there, then the systems can help a lot. If you're not, then it is people dependent. But when it comes to the outbound side, I think the most important skill there is research, right? So if you were to send a very personalized one-on-one mailer to someone, then it requires a lot of research skills. It requires a lot of written communication skills. So it's better handled separately. And the first question which you said, sales and prospecting motions to be different. I believe it is good to kind of separate it out right in the beginning. It kind of gives the sales guys can be more productive, but then you have to decide when you can hire those 2 resources. Otherwise, what Deepak said is precisely the point, right? So till at such point in time, everyone is a superhuman, right? So you can do everything. But once you're ready, I think it is better to have a backend support.
Then I have a follow-up question, because I think this question comes from many entrepreneurs actually as they build. What's the ratio of BDR to sales that you think works? Is there a magic number for this?
Again, look, that is driven by what kind of a segment you are running after. If you're running after, SME mid-market kind of a stuff, and where, so when you say BDR, you mean the outbound guy, or you're taking BDR
outbound?
As an
Yeah,
inbound?
I meant the outbound demand gen person versus the sales rep in terms of what kind of ratio works.
Yeah. Again, it can range from anywhere from 1:3 to 1:1, depending upon the value of the deals and the kind of accounts you're running after. If you're running after accounts where, very large enterprise accounts where your buying group is across 10, 12, 15 people, then a 1-to-1 is also not a bad investment to have, right? But it can go to 1:3 as well, depending upon if you're doing a 40-50K sort of a deal, and you are, it can also go to 1:3.
Got it. Deepak, any different view on this?
Yeah, I think I agree with Ankur. It could range from 1:1 to 1:3. But my view on it is I like the 1:1 ratio for a different reason altogether. SDRs, a lot of SDRs aspire to become AEs as a career trajectory. Some of them aspire to become SDR managers. So when you have a 1:1 ratio, you can, at least in the initial days, tag SDRs to AEs. And there's a lot more learning when you tag them together, although they're doing different motions, right? SDR is part of the demo or discovery calls. gets to learn how closing is done and builds his skill set up. And over time as well, when you have a larger SDR team and a larger AE team, at least in our case, we have seen 1:1 work really. And Alok, I know we have had these discussions before. Should we do 1:1? We have stuck to 1:1, and it somehow is working pretty well for us in terms of sometimes, you may have a lot of leads for which you require more SDRs. It depends on the motion again, as Ankur said, right? If you are a heavy inbound company, you have a lot of leads, you probably need more SDRs than AEs. Heavy outbound company, you probably, it might be the other way around, but I like the 1:1 ratio.
Sorry, I have another follow-up question. I'm also going to include Apoorv Singh's question on this. Very often, I have also been asked this question, should we outsource our outbound? Which is that, there are lots of these agencies, particularly in India, by the way, there are quite a few. You just tell them what kind of persona you want to target. They will basically reach out on your behalf, and they basically charge you on a per meeting basis. They'll set up a meeting for you in which you do the first call or the demo, etc. with the customer. So number one, would you look at outsourcing the outbound demand gen function? And I have another one, which is sort of related, but not, which is some people also argue that, keeping BDR in India is not effective. We don't know how to do it. Well, this is one of those roles. When you have enough money in the bank, you actually want to keep these people in US, assuming US is your territory, or Europe, wherever it might be. Would love your commentary on both these questions as well.
Yeah, I can start. I have pretty strong views here because we tried the first one. Can you outsource it? We have tried in Slintel. We have tried that in previous companies. For some reason, it never worked for us, right? And figured out, dive deeper and thought about why doesn't outsourcing work? Why do you have to have these functions in house? Typically, when you outsource to a company that does SDR work, right? They're generally going to be working with 5 other clients like yours. Like you, you're probably not going to be the dedicated, the one client, unless you pay them a ton of money. And when they work on 5 different clients from 5 different industries, 5 different use cases, they're not going to be experimenting every single day. And I think experimenting different templates, trying out different things, that hustle is very, very important. Maybe one day you're doing a meme on email, one day you're doing a video one day you're doing a voiceover, one day you're playing the guitar on video. As an SDR, you do anything and everything to get a meeting. And when you have people in house, I've seen people do, all kinds of things to get meetings, right? Compared to an outsourced agency. The second question, Alok, is, sorry, I missed the second question. Could you please repeat that? The second question
was about having actually BDRs not in India, but in the geography you're targeting itself, let's say US or Europe.
Yeah. Initially, I was of that opinion too, but my opinion has changed over time. I feel the quality of BDRs and SDRs in India is really, really good right now compared to what it was 5 years ago or 3 years ago. I feel you can get people, even cold calling works really well out of India. A lot of people have American accents, can talk like Americans. I think I've seen it work really well if you hire the right people. Emailing, LinkedIn messaging is a no-brainer. You might get slightly higher efficiency if you get really good SDRs in US, but I don't see why you really. The trade-off is not huge, in my opinion, and I think India is fast catching up. You get really, really good talent here.
Yeah. So in my view, Alok, in a steady state operations, there's little reason why would you outsource your demand generation? It's the core function for your entire sales and marketing or your GTM motion. But when you are beginning, it largely depends upon what skill you bring to the table. If you are a founder who's largely coming from a tech background, then to begin with, you might want to kind of get some expert agency to do that for you. But in a steady state operation, there is little reason to kind of have this function outsourced, right? So that's one. The second point, which you mentioned, I think as far as US is concerned, I would agree with what Deepak is saying. But for some of the geographies, localization makes a lot of sense. For example, if you're looking at Southeast Asia and you want to build a motion in Indonesia, or you want to build a motion in Malaysia, or even for that matter, Middle East, I think it makes sense to have some of these skills locally present in geographies because of language constraints. Sometimes if you're making an outbound call to some of the people, that also matters because of the telecom rules in these geographies. So it depends. US definitely, I think it makes sense to have people stationed in India, but for some of the geographies, you have to decide to kind of build the skills locally.
Understood. Actually, I think this would be a useful data point for many entrepreneurs. What's a typical price point? Let's say, Deepak, let's take US as an example. You have to hire a BDR in US versus India. What are the roundabout costs you're talking of?
The cost of the employees, you mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so in US, right, depending on the state you're hiring, it varies. Suppose you're hiring in California, people, SDRs are more expensive here, right? So you probably are looking at a 50, 60K base, and then commissions on top that could range anywhere from 50% of the base to 100% of the base, right? If you go to places like Utah, or you go to lower cost places, you might be able to get people for 30, 40K base, but then you have to pay commissions, and the total salary might come to around 50, 60K, right? So in US, I think it varies drastically by state. In India, I'm assuming anywhere between I think 8 to 15 lakhs you get decent SDRs, but as again, I'm talking about people in the initial stages of their career. Obviously, people with more experience demand more, but I think you can get decent SDRs at that price range.
Yeah. I think the thumb rule seems to be there is a 1:5 cost differential at least. In fact, Deepak, in US, you went to, you said Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, in all these places, the outbound BDR used to be sort of in the 30K range. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm talking 15 years back, but costs, I guess, have gone up everywhere. Okay, I'm just thinking at the time which questions we should take. There are actually, okay, Rajesh from GrowSmart has asked a question saying we have a challenge in creating urgency for outbound leads. Closure takes relatively much longer. I know some of you argued that why should it if you have qualified it well? And saying with inbound leads, this is less of a challenge. How do you accelerate closures for outbound leads?
Ankur, do you want to?
That's a tough one. I don't think if there is a straight answer to this. I think what the gentleman means there is the end-to-end cycle, right? From initiating a deal to a closure, not after opportunity. I'm sure after opportunity it is pretty similar, but yeah, there is no magic bullet. You have to have a clear articulation of the value proposition, and you have to make sure that you understand the buyer journey end to end. And if you can create interventions which can accelerate that buyer journey, say for example by reaching out to a much wider audiences on the customer side who can influence the movement of a transaction, and if you can take an informed decision at the right point in time in the cycle, that could be one lever which you might have to accelerate the deal. Apart from that, I think it's a hard road. Better research, better articulation, better personalization, and hitting the nail on the head when it matters the most. I think I don't know if there is a silver bullet.
Just to add to Ankur's answer, I'll also say that while there is not a if and only if kind of a correlation, by and large you will have a lot of outbound for slightly larger customers, slightly larger ACVs. I think it's actually okay that the sales cycle is taking a little bit more time. It may not just be an intent issue, sometimes it's just a size issue. Larger customers take longer. Frankly, even if you're an inbound cycle with a larger customer, it will take more time as well in many of those cases. So part of it is just the nature of the beast. And part of it just lies in, again, I think Ankur has repeated many times, but how well you have defined your ICP, how well you have defined the value proposition, what's the content that you use in your sales cycle. I think all of those will also impact the closure life cycle. But all I can say is that even with very successful companies, I have seen outbound motion take a lot longer just in the sales cycle time than inbound. So if you're finding yourself in this situation, it may not necessarily be all that unique. And it may not be wrong either, by the way. So don't just assume that something is going wrong because you're finding yourself in that situation. Maybe we'll take question from Yash, which is an interesting question, which is that, the process of finding your ICP through outbound. You try something, some things work, something doesn't work. You try a different thing. You either change the industry, you change the persona within that industry, or you change the messaging to the same persona within the same industry. There are lots of different things you can do, right? But one of the hard calls for all entrepreneurs is how to separate signal and noise. Should you try it for 2 weeks, then give up? Should you try it for 2 months, then give up? Or should you try it for 1 year and then give up on a particular experimentation? When do you know it's working, not working? When do you move on to try something else in the outbound process?
Yeah, I can take that. At least in the initial days when we started off, I can't speak for everyone, but I can tell you what we did. We had 3 personas. I think if you have too many personas that you're targeting, also you get diverted. We had 3 personas: sales ops, VP of sales, and VP of marketing. We did not know with whom our messaging will resonate the best, but we tried different templates for different personas. I don't think you should give up in 2 weeks or 1 month. I think it takes a minimum of 2 to 3 months for you to see any good results from it, right? Because it's a science, you have to kind of have that persistence and the experimentation every single day. So in our case, what we would do is try out between 50 to 100 messages every day, experiment with emails, LinkedIn messages, etc., personalization, semi-personalization. So 50 to 100 messages every day. So in a month, say you're doing 100 a day, you do 2,000 a month, and in 3 months you try 3 different personas continuously for 3 months, right? So you're doing 6,000 messages. I think you might get typically, reply rates around 5 to 10%, demo rates are 1 to 2%. So you should do the math, and then if you, at the end of 3 months, if you end up closing 4 or 5 of those deals, you would know, at least in the initial stages, you would know which personas are replying to your message, even opening and replying to your message, who are coming to a demo, and then who are closing, right? And then you can start focusing on that one or 2 personas later. But yeah, I mean, I would say at least a 3-month process. I don't know, Ankur, if you have different thoughts, but giving up too early might not help here.
Yeah, so depends upon the product. Again, the evolution of the company. If you're right at the start point of your company, then you might want to try for maybe 3, 4, 5 months, continuously look at the data, as what Deepak is saying, some of the conversions, how they're happening. So that gives you a fair bit of an understanding whether the message is resonating or not. But if you have an established sales process, you exactly know what your sales cycles are, then at least for the duration of a sales cycle is what you should experiment with, something to start seeing data which is viable. I'll give you an example. We were at when I was at Capillary, we are a vertical SaaS player, right, focused on retail. So about 2 years back, we wanted to kind of expand our ICP. We started looking at consumer products as an industry. So our retail sales cycle times were typically 4 to 6 months. So we started running after CPGs with a conscious thought that this is the first time we are reaching out to a new ICP, so this might take a little longer. So we persisted with that for a year. After a year, we did look at the data. We looked at how many things were converting at various stages and the customers which got converted, what is the ROI which we were able to give to them, what were the churn rates. And at some point in time, we did decide that possibly our value proposition does not resonate that too well in this particular industry, but we gave it a 1.5 years of time. But Capillary is a different stage of evolution. We were 8 years, 9 years into business. So at that stage, you can afford to give so much long to kind of develop a new business, a new ICP. But when you are smaller, then maybe you want to fail fast. So a 3 to 4 month period could be, as what Deepak said, could make more sense.
Deepak, you touched upon an interesting number. You said, whatever, 1,000 mails a day, 2,000 mails a month, etc. I think will be useful for people to understand that on a per BDR basis, how many outbound messages do you expect? And how many leads? And I understand that this varies by category, this will vary by ACV and all those things. But even in your world, what is the productivity to a demo that you would expect to be created from every outbound rep, both in terms of initial outreach and the number of demos created?
Sure. Actually, you're right, Alok. It varies by category. So if you're targeting SMB and mid-market versus enterprise, you probably do a lot more outreaches. What I have seen, at least industry standard for SMB mid-market, is you get 5 to 10% reply rates. If you get a 10% reply rate, your SDR is phenomenal. Like he's right. 10% is phenomenal. 5% is the average typically. That's the reply rate, but a lot of replies would be no's, right? Or call me later or talk to me later. So the demos would be 1 to 2%. If you're getting over 2% demo rates, then you're doing really well. And you should pat your SDR on the back. And then closure, once you get a demo to closure could be anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on the category, the product and all.
Fair. No, this is very, very useful.
I had one. So
Yeah,
I think,
no,
I'm looking at the list of questions. Shri has what seems like a very interesting one to me, which is there some common effort, and maybe it is content, maybe it is something else, which works to make both inbound and outbound more effective? And I'm assuming the question behind that is, when one is trying out both motions, are there common sets of activities that one can do? And maybe then you zero in on one motion over the other. Or are these two completely distinct activities and not much of an overlap?
I think Shri has answered for himself. I think it's content. The answer is content.
Okay. And if I may, how much effort, or how do you see, if you're very early in the journey, let's say you've just started doing go-to-market in some sense, how much effort should one, or how do you think about what's the right amount of effort to put behind content? Because typically common wisdom is that content takes much longer to generate ROI.
Yeah, content takes much longer, but it's good to invest in content early, right? Because you don't want to be too late to content as well. But typically, I would say 6 months or more is what content takes. Good content takes, by the time you start generating meaningful leads out of it. SEO and SEM could be faster ways to get inbound leads. Later on, you could do ABM campaigns and other stuff on the marketing bit. But content, I would not push content out. I would still hire a content person if you have the resources and start writing content, because it's going to be big in maybe 1 year down the lane or 2 years down the lane. And you want to start that early on. But don't expect leads from.
Sorry, no, you mentioned writing content. How important? One thing you also hear about is videos these days. Is that important, or not as much compared to say text or other traditional forms of content?
No, I mean all forms of content, Arpit. I think world is moving more towards videos and even short form videos than long form videos. So yeah, all forms of content, webinars, videos, text. I mean, you have to mix your content up, right? You can't just have a blog with text in it and no videos and no podcasts. I mean, today, if you go to all the interesting SaaS companies, their blog will have a mix of everything. And you need to try everything out to kind of get your leads.
Maybe I'll pick the last question from the list here. The BDR, whose organization does this person belong to, sales or marketing?
In my opinion, Alok, we've always kept it under sales. I've seen BDRs being under sales in previous startups I worked with. I know industry research shows, I don't know if it's changed, but 3 years ago when I looked at it, there were more BDRs under marketing than under sales. Yeah. But the ratio was 60-40, right? So there's people on both sides of the equation. We have kept it under sales.
Yeah, I have a different take on it. I think it is given how you want to run the modern sales engine, which is more content driven, which is more account based engagement driven. It is best kept under marketing, so as to give a control to marketing if you are making them responsible for pipeline generation. Because BDRs still, if you don't run it like a relay race, BDRs have have an important role to play at some point in time in the qualification machinery. In my word view, I think they should be sitting more under marketing than the sales guys.
Great.
But I agree with Deepak that there are all kinds of models which exist, but everyone has an opinion on it. So do I. I think marketing is a better place.
Great. I know we are at the end of exactly an hour, and we always promise that we will stop at 1 hour. So Deepak and Ankur, first of all, thank you so much for taking our time. And Deepak, I know it's an odd time zone for you from where you are. And thank you also to all the people who attended, asked questions. And we will be back with the 15th one sometime in the future. And as always, please do email us, text us, whatever works for you on topics that you think are relevant to cover in these SaaS talks. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Alok. Thanks, Arpit.
All right.
Yes. Bye. See you.